Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for being here today. Like Monica said, my name is Vanessa Petrasko, and today I really just want to share with you all the research that I've been working on for the past 2 years. It will let me. Okay, so today I just want to go over 5 basic objectives. First of all, I want to look at the motivation for my thesis. Secondly, I want to look at the background. Third, I want to look at the methodology, followed by the results, and finally the conclusion. So before I kind of jump into the objectives, I basically kind of want to briefly go over what really was I doing for my thesis. So basically, the aim of my thesis was to look at some of the influential factors of government productivity and also to look at the efficiencies within the different sectors of the government. For the scope of this presentation, I'm just going to focus on the first part of the influential factors. Okay, so first I want to briefly talk about the motivation that I had for this project. And the motivation was really kind of threefold. First of all, I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to work for one of my professors, Professor O'Rourke. And through this research, it really kind of inspired me to look more about kind of just the government in general, productivity there, quantifying a measurement for government and things of that nature. Going along with this, the second motivation that I had was kind of the concept of a do-nothing Congress. There's been a lot of research out there, a lot of news reports in the media talking about basically the number of laws that is passed by Congress. Is this really a good thing, or is this a bad thing, or does this really matter in general? So that was kind of a big influential factor right there as well. Finally, the third influential factor for my thesis revolves around kind of the importance and the difficulties of having a quantifiable measure for government productivity. Since there isn't one out there right now, there is a lot of research out there kind of stating the importances and the difficulties of creating such a measurement. So it was really from these 3 pieces of motivation that inspired me to do this project. Not very good with this clicker. Okay. So background, looking a little bit at the lit review, I just want to briefly mention a few things. First of all, I want to mention that there actually was a past indice created by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And this project was known as the Division of Industry Productivity Studies Project. And it was really through this project that they basically went out and created an output index for total government measurements. And this index was created from 1967 to 1994. Unfortunately, in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan dismantled the project, and it was actually officially terminated in 1996. So it's really these only 28-year span period of time that we have these output measures. Secondly, there is a lot of literature on just quantifiable measures for government productivity. And a lot of this research, it really just kind of states, first of all, the importance for creating measurement, but also the difficulty with creating such a measurement. A lot of these studies don't really offer concrete or quantifiable ways of creating such a measurement. And then thirdly, there is also another way of measuring government productivity that is offered in literature reviews, and this is known as a performance-based measurement. For the performance-based measurements, these focus primarily on program funding levels and the expected results of the programs. So this is just a little bit of the background involved for the scope of the paper. Okay, so just jumping right into the model, I first want to mention the variables that I used for the thesis. Like I mentioned before, I did use some different dependent variables to look at the efficiencies, but today I'm just going to look at the influential factors. So I have all the variables up here on this screen. Don't be too concerned if you can't read those. Just kind of put those up there. But the dependent variable that I really wanted to look at was actually that output indice that the Bureau of Labor Statistics created. And that's basically just an output index for the total government productivity. For the independent variables, I chose to focus on 5 of them as being influential factors for this output measure. The first being population, Secondly, the number of laws passed by Congress per year. Third, inflation. Fourth, the number of total federal personnel per year. And then finally, the fifth is the number of votes in the House per year. Okay, so jumping to the model. For my thesis, like I've said before, I did have 3 independent variables coming from those output indices from the labor of statistics. And I also used 4 forms of the model for the independent variables. I really wanted to use these 4 forms to account for any specification errors that were to occur, and also to account for the overall robustness and just kind of consistency of the model. So you can see here below, this is kind of the general equation of the model, and the 4 forms do follow into that general equation. So with any regression model, there were some general concerns that I had for my paper. The first concern that I had revolves around the data itself. Simply because the output indices were only created for 28 years of time, I only had a population of 28, which is a concern simply just because it is quite small. The second concern that I had was if there were an omitted variable. I think that's a concern with any regression you run, especially when dealing with government productivity. It's a pretty daunting and complex topic, so definitely was a concern for me. And the third general concern I had involves multicollinearity. In earlier models that I ran, I did include variables including the total government expenditures, tax rates, and GDP. But when looking at the multicollinearity, looking at the correlation matrices, as well as running some BIF tests, there was high correlation there. So I did go ahead and omit those variables from the model to correct for multicollinearity. Okay, so now just jumping right ahead into the results. First, looking at the statistical significance. From the regressions, it did show that the number of federal employees was statistically significant at the 1% level. The number of laws passed by Congress, population and inflation, I'm sorry, that should not be there. Population and inflation were statistically significant at the 5% level, and the number of laws passed by Congress was actually not statistically significant. The adjusted R squared was 0.727, and the variables, just looking at the signs, the number of laws passed by Congress was actually the only positive correlation, and all the other variables were negatively correlated. So, kind of going back to the main point of this paper, what is the purpose? What are these results? So first, kind of just going right back to the beginning, the purpose of this paper was to really look at the influential factors in these government indices and to see if there were any influencing factors in these outputs. And I did this really as kind of almost like a baby step to pave the way for, down the road looking at finding a new quantifiable measure for government productivity. The results, what do they mean? So from the results, the 2 kind of important key takeaways. First, the results suggest that employment and voting may potentially fail to increase these output measures. So it may be advantageous to monitor these variables in order to help improve productivity. The second big takeaway from the results focuses on the fact that the number of laws passed by Congress was not statistically significant. So this kind of helps you infer that maybe there should be a focus on other areas that play a more stronger or significant role. Maybe there isn't really such a need to be so concerned if Congress is being productive or not. And what is to come to the future, kind of why I did this research in the beginning, was again tying back to kind of just paving the way for that quantifiable government productivity measure. So that's really kind of the whole point of the thesis. Okay, and that is that. So I think we're supposed to hold questions to the end, so if anybody has questions, I will be happy to answer them at the end. Thank you.